Hello, and welcome to the Stacking Dingers Show. I am your host, Matthew, aka Sheep, aka Dark Sheep. I am joined tonight again by the lovely, the amazing Brendan Tuma, or at Too Much Tuma on everything. Brendan, welcome.
How are you doing, Matt? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Our buddy Chris is again skipping out this week, but I think this January his schedule should open up, so we'll be seeing him a lot more. And yeah, we are diving straight into something kind of fun tonight. We have put together between the three of us a top 100 rankings. So if you're seeing this video, there'll be a link in the YouTube description. Otherwise, there'll be a link in the Substack on the same post to the sheet. It's a Google sheet. It is a kind of fun thing that it has all three, yours, mine, and Chris's top 100 rankings separate, and then a sheet that kind of compares them all and makes kind of a composite ranking.
Yeah, I think that it's January 2nd we're recording this, so hence the Happy New Year. And I think that what we were just talking about offline a little bit, that it feels like it's the unofficial start of baseball prep, fantasy baseball prep, all that. So I think getting this top 100 out for people who might just be diving into the baseball contest on Underdog, or ready to start really gearing up with some of their drafts. It seems like a great time to get it out. And I think tonight we want to talk about not just like how to use these rankings, but how to use rankings in general. And then I know some of the more fun conversations that we'll probably have, hosting this entire show this off season, is going to be on some of the specific player differences who we're higher and lower on.
Yeah, and as we go through the off season, we'll be probably doing one or two updates to the rank, or I don't know exactly our update schedule, kind of as we feel it's necessary, but we'll be coming back to maybe talk about why and how we're updating them additionally. And our goal is to have like a more like a 200, 240 rankings by the time the main Dinger contest rolls around. But we have this top 100 as a starting point. Although I will admit, I have like 106. I'm this was my first time ever really setting up any sort of rankings to share with other people. Oftentimes, I'm like using other people's rankings as a means of getting different with my thoughts, or I'm using just straight projections or just straight ADP. So it was interesting for me to get into it. So I think the first question is, why does someone want to make rankings?
Yeah, so you mentioned, like, just first time going through it and everything. First of all, I think anyone who's playing fantasy sports or some of these games in Underdog, it's always going to be a helpful exercise, whether you are someone who's a content creator, or if you're just playing. I think, like you said, like it makes you think differently about certain players. And similar to when you're in a draft and you have to make that decision, do I want player A or player B? When you're making rankings, and especially when you put them out in the world, it really makes you want to make sure that you can, like, back that up and give a why and everything. So um I think just that process is something that everyone should go through. Obviously, some people just want to rely on another ranking list or projection, like you're saying that you have in the past. And I think that, therefore, what we want to talk about tonight a little bit is how we came about these rankings. It's for me, it's definitely not as black and white as here's the rankings, draft these players in this order, and you're good to go. Now, we construct them, especially my list, in a way where if you are drafting off my rankings, you're going to end up with players who I value higher than the market, and you're going to not end up with ones who I think are clear fades. But again, even within that, there's specific nuances to talk through.
Yeah, and the other reason to doing rankings is kind of simple that people want them. Uh, as much as we love to sit here and talk in depth, dive deep on subjects, uh, not everybody cares. It's a simple thing. I think there was a thread on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, by JJ Zacharyson, the late round QB, that really kind of opened my eyes to this. I think it was sometime in this off season of the football off season. He put out a thread just saying, I love doing all these in depth content things. Like his newsletter is amazing. His picks and his holds and whatever that article is, I do get it, but I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head. But the thing he does in season and even before the season, all of his in depth data analysis and all that. But the point of the thread was people just want rankings. What, for right or wrong, like they like to see those numbers, they like those lists. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's just fun too.
100%. And I think, that can lead us into a little bit here how we each set up our own rankings and kind of our, as you phrase it, some of the goals for yours. Um, I want to say, like, for me, like the number one thing that I'm trying to do with this is someone who has a bit of a love-hate relationship with creating rankings, because there is so much value into it and people do want them, and it's quick, it's easy. Um, but it's just it does not mean that, the player I have ranked 14th, I'm not saying they are 100% always going to be better than the player I have ranked 17th. And,
Even 24th.
exactly, the deeper you get in a draft, um, that's going to change. Like 190 versus 210 is really not that big of a difference. Like 14 versus 17 is probably a bigger difference than that. So I think that's part of why we capped it off at a top 100 right now, because just this early in the off season, we want to be honest with, anyone using them or listening to us here, and say that these are the ones I feel best about. If we went deeper, I wouldn't have felt as good about, again, like 160 versus even like 180 and certain things like that. So for me, so much of the rankings is about getting in the right ballpark. And like, for an example, for me is Yandy Diaz, who I just think is several rounds mispriced. And that's an easy one for me to kind of just move him way up compared to where he is at ADP right now. And when I did my rankings in another Google sheet of mine, I compare my ranked ADP and then I color code it. So if it's like green, that if it's like bright green, that's saying, this is someone who's a big target because the ADP difference is that big, sort of thing. So for me, it's really about first and foremost just getting players in the ballpark, and that's especially true on underdog baseball where ADP is is so soft. There are some big differences, way more so than I would have had for NFL entering the season, for instance.
Yeah. And like Yandy Diaz is a good example of a person that you have ranked very high, and I think uh, Chris and myself, who have him much lower, don't dislike him more, or we like him just as much as you. It's just you're making him more of a priority by putting him that high out of ADP. So there is, for me, some of it is also like lining up where I think I need to start trying to get him based on where he's going at ADP also.
Yeah, and that again, this is again going to be the first or second bullet point of a million nuances that we can discuss with like creating these rankings and everything. But that's an excellent point. Like I put him, I forget if it was something like 30 spots ahead of ADP or whatever it was, and part of that is because if his ADP does rise, I don't want to then have to go right back into the ranks and move him up a little bit more. Like I do always want to be sensitive to ADP and what the market's saying, but just in terms of like actually physically and going into the dock and doing that, this is me saying like, hey, like I would be comfortable taking him this early. But obviously, if you're doing a lot of drafts and you're looking at the rankings, comparing where I have them, where we have them to ADP, you don't need to take him at that spot. But it's just highlighting, hey, the next few rounds, this is someone to prioritize, sort of thing.
Yeah. And before, yeah, we're kind of getting deeper than quicker than I wanted to, but that was just what made me think about Yandy. But sort of, my goal was slightly different when I was setting up my rankings than featuring that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
My goal was to have it set up so that basically, if somebody just drafted like off the top one or two, three people in the queue, they would end up with a team that I personally was getting without rankings. So basically, mine has a lot of tiers of different positions or groups of where I'm targeting different positions. So what I did while I was making them is I did a first pass. I just sort of did them, and then I did a draft, and I thought, and then I looked. I forced myself to do a draft where I had to take the person at the top of my queue each time, and so that let me make some adjustments, fine tune some like this guy versus that guy. Like, okay, well, I would actually would prefer this guy here compared to like, for example, Dylan Cease was a guy that I had a little bit higher ranked than I really wanted him when it came time to actually select a player, and it was him versus another pitcher. So it bumped him down. And then I did that like over 3 or 4 drafts. Uh, and my goal was by the time I hit, you know, the end of the rankings, I had a start that was similar to what I personally would have done in like a hand picked draft.
That makes sense. And I think that, I have some players like that where it's like, oh my God, this guy's got an ADP of 28. I have him at 50. Is that outrageous? Am I dropping him too much? And your Cease example reminded me of that. I think like Adolis Garcia is someone I have a decent bit lower for the fourth year in a row, whatever it is now. So ready to be dunked on for that again. But just using him as a random example right now. He's someone where again, I come back to the underdog side of this, and if you are, finding yourself you're in rooms and this specific room is really paying attention to ADP, then you can use that to your advantage and you can wait, to get Yandi at cost, for instance. Um, but just in general, I especially once you get, halfway through, I am, would not be afraid to be jumping around, grabbing guys later or earlier, depending on if you agree where the ranks line up.
Yeah, and the let's see. So
I think we should
some
get into those lettered bullet points
yeah, yeah.
of what we have.
So
Yeah.
there's let's say I'm Joe or Josephine Public here, and I've never drafted underdog before. I got a little bit of football money sitting in my account. I had a good football season on underdog. I'm gonna try some baseball. I used to watch baseball as a kid with my dad, and I want to try a few drafts. So uh, I'm gonna come. There's this great site, stackingdingers.com, by these guys who seem to know what they're talking about, or at least they talk a lot, so they must know what they're talking about. Um, so just gonna download this sheet. I'm gonna load it up into Underdog, and I'm gonna start drafting. So, how many red flags do you think you would say is in that story?
I think that's kind of what we're hoping for with people getting into baseball. So I love the overall picture of it. Um, when you say red flags, are you talking about ways that you can go wrong then with the ranks?
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
just straight loading into the CSV, into your rankings, and starting a draft. So,
for
what's the
sure.
first one?
So I would say that the biggest thing that you want to pay attention to with any rank, because for instance, if I think if you use the rankings every single time, you're going to end up with the same team, basically all the time, especially at this point in the offseason. Like I have William Contreras. He's not in my top 100, but some of the drafts that I've done, I literally take him every single time because he's that egregiously mispriced, I think, and it's just too good of a value to pass up. I don't care if I'm overexposed to him, like, but that's such like a rare example that you're probably not going to run into. And that being said, the number one thing you still want to think about with these rankings is just diversification in general, because you can just be so sure about a player entering a season, and it's still going to be better for you in the long run over time across so many different players to just make sure you're getting exposure to everyone. Like, I thought Corbin Carroll's price was getting way too high this past offseason. I thought Bryce Harper was egregiously mispriced on underdog. I thought Christian Javier was a no-brainer at so many points in the draft. And just like, you can just be so sure, analytically, eye test wise, and you just want to make sure you're diversifying. So I'm pulling up my first round here. And like, for instance, like, one of the biggest questions I think is still a topic for a show I want to do is, rank these first round outfielders, because yeah, everyone's taking Acuna first overall. And then it does seem to be a little bit of a Soto then Judge consensus, but then, you can kind of bounce around. And just because I have, Jordan Alvarez a few spots ahead of Julio, that doesn't mean I want to end up with zero Julio. So I think like the that's like the easiest example I can give is the first round is um make sure you're getting a little bit of everyone at some point. And if you do have like a really strong leaner favorite, take them more often than not, but still not every time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know in the first round, I usually have guys that I do close to fade, and some guys that I go over twice the field on because I personally have a risk tolerance level that can handle when that guy that I have 20% of gets hurt the second weekend of the season. So um, that's another thing to consider if you're just jumping into this for the first time, you're using rankings, is what is what is your risk tolerance of throwing out a lineup. So part of that also is how many teams you're going to plan on drafting. So one of the big things that sort of changed for me in really starting to succeed at DFS fantasy and stuff was I started considering that, like, how much of this sport, how much of this style of contest and so on am I going to play? So how much am I going to play Roto this year? I'm planning this out in my head now. How much I want to plan on underdog, and that helps me develop my risk tolerance within those platforms too. And overall, like maybe I know I'm going to target somebody I really like in Roto more than underdog or something like that, and I'm going to balance where I'm risking them depending on the format and just trying to diversify in other ways also. So diversifying and like look actually like not just firing drafts until you get bored, but like thinking through and planning is a big point of emphasis that I'd really like people to think ahead on.
That's a that's an excellent thing to cover. And like you said, the number of drafts really matters, because if you're going to do over the course of the entire offseason 200 MLB drafts, then for me, I would, doesn't have to be exact the same, rostership across the first round evenly, but I would consider personally, diversifying a little bit more. Whereas if you're only going to do 4 best ball drafts on underdog, and you're just like, no, Julio's going to win MVP this year, then sure, like, take him in each one, sort of thing. So I think that's like a really important thing to consider. Within there, obviously, there's a ton of ranges that you can fall in.
I like your example there because I have been mentally getting on the Julio for MVP train this year.
Um, Something else that I want to, know about getting these rankings up and everything is just the idea of new information. And Um, that's why I again focused before on the idea of getting players into the right ballpark sort of thing, because I'm trying to think of another example here within my top 100, but like for me already, like the whole outfield problem, that's probably what I've been focusing on the most so far this offseason, and really thinking through and trying to apply how does this look in drafts? How does this look in rankings? And that's something that I wasn't thinking about on the day this contest launched sort of thing. So as we continue to evolve our draft strategies, our specific ones especially, that's something that might change rankings. Um, Something else like small and obvious that could change. Like I put out today that like Pete Crow again. This is talking a little bit outside top 100 now, but just the idea of new information, right? Like if um obviously if a player gets hurt or is we get word that there's going to be more playing time, like that sort of thing, like those are big ones. But sometimes you just like Nolan Jones, I have an idea of where I'm at with Nolan Jones, but I still haven't done this deep dive article that I've even queued up in my drafts on Stubback and everything. And that's something like I might look at that and be like, oh my god, I was way off, like I'm not into Nolan Jones. And um or I might look at it and think he's a priority. My point is that these are takes are perceptions of player value. New projection systems are going to come out that could highlight some other players and present us with new information that way. Pete Carl Armstrong, the Cubs could come out and say he's going to be our everyday center fielder from day one. That would change things. They could re-sign Cody Bellinger and then another first baseman or center fielder. That would change things in the negative way for him. Um, I don't think anyone should at any point in the offseason draft process, get themselves into take lock. You should always be um flexible. You should always be open to the entire player pool, and depending on that specific moment in time, be willing to attack drafts in different ways.
That's a great point because that's something I find myself personally having a problem with is some take locks. I think I've even year to year sometimes I don't adjust properly. Something I'm always trying to get better at. But if you're just drafting based off of someone else's rankings, um, you have to know that their player takes are built into that. So if you have a different one, just change it. So like don't get too locked into someone else's takes either. Um, and right now we still have a bunch of people unsigned. It's been fairly slow in terms of signing. So there's definitely like you highlighted the Cubs. Um, like Toronto seems like they really need to still sign someone for the lineup. And um, you can also get some peripheral things like if Cody Bellinger goes to Toronto, that's a boost to Vlad and Bo a little bit because some of the reasons we're down on them is because the overall lineup. So there's definitely a ton of new information, and then a whole bunch of new information once spring training starts too.
For sure. I think relating to that is, and this is what makes Underdog really unique, is the idea that these tournaments, are typically being drafted, definitely over several weeks, sometimes several months, and ADPs are going to move. So it does put you in the spot where you got to think through like, hey, here's this, player who has a really late ADP, who I think is going to rise, but you might not even like that player. But does it make sense to take them just because you have a feeling that you'll gain um, closing line ADP over the rest of the field? And I think when that's something that we should have an entire conversation about at some point. And I think related to that is if you do like the player, then you really want to be taking them right now. um I'll come back to Junior Caminero for a sec, who his ADP right now is 196. A few weeks ago, it was in the 230s. So it's on the rise. Um, and I just don't see there's any way where it goes the other way. So I guess, that you got to kind of ask yourself if you want Junior Caminero, the price is better now than it's going to be um, later on.
Yeah. Uh, Example of that, again, a little bit out of this 100 range, recently for me was Jared Kelenic, who, as soon as he got traded to the Braves, um, I knew his price would be going up. And I honestly don't really love him and sort of all the struggles he had, and then the second half that he had last year kind of scared me away from him. But he's an outfielder on the Braves, and I want some of him, so I really made a point, and I'm still grabbing him. But he's already been, I don't remember exactly how much, but he's up 20 spots or something, and now Vaughn Grisham is gone, so even that somewhat of a threat of some playing time there is gone. So he'll keep going up. So that's an example of a guy that um, is I would have, like, if we had gone through the rankings, I would have had him higher than where he was at, but I also was doing that so I did get some before he got too expensive.
And that's where I don't want to harp on this specific topic right this second necessarily for too long, but that's where it becomes, it can become like a struggle as ADP shift. Okay, now I want to move him up a little bit to stay ahead of ADP. Now the ADP is too high, I want to move him down. Oh, but now I just read about this the swing change that he's making, and looks like he's going to get more time, so I'm going to be a little bit bullish again. And that's where you can, it's really important to just kind of get in that general range with what you're comfortable with, and having a projection or a rank to anchor yourself to.
Yeah.
um Something
So,
else that I
go
was
ahead.
gonna just ask, like, something I'm curious that I think you'll be able to speak really well to, having been drafting this game for a number of years now, and being a volume drafter, is the idea of what your roster needs at that specific point of the draft. So
Yeah.
if someone's using our rankings, um they start out, for whatever reason, they take three outfielders in the first four rounds, and then they're on the clock, and our highest ranked players an outfielder. How are you approaching that at various points in your drafts?
Yeah. So that also goes back a little bit, starting on figuring out how much you're going to draft, because if you want to distribute structures throughout the amount of drafts that you're going to do, there's somewhat of a I don't write this down, but there is somewhat of a mental okay. I start two outfielders. I want 30% of the time to take an infielder. After that, 30% of the time I want to take a pitcher, or I start uh, outfielder, infielder. That's a really interesting decision, uh, where I want to distribute that next pick throughout the drafts. Where I want to go, I want to spend on another one of those like top tier infielders, maybe 30% of the time, or at that point I want to get one of those uh, middle, like the Christian Yelich, Luis Robert tier as my second outfielder about 30% of the time. So I think there's probably some mental stuff that just drafting can get you practiced at that. Uh, but if you want to get better at it, I would say write down what you want, and um, maybe like you don't you never want to go into the whole idea that you don't want to go into a draft with like a concrete plan. But if you write down like some of these structures and stuff that you want to get at different percents, or you're on your or you've done your first like five drafts, go through all those lineups and see how you started in those first five drafts and write it down and say, okay, do I want to keep doing this? Am I happy with this? And then each time you draft after that, maybe you're looking at that list and at certain points and you're saying, okay, I want to go this direction a certain amount of the time.
Absolutely, yeah. So I the kind of a little bit tying it all together for me is in this conversation is, um, what you, Chris, and I all tried to do is set up these rankings in a way where we feel that this will create the best team for you, because it's so like you can look at our rankings and you can look at, player 35 versus player 38 and just be like, player 38 is better. And we've said, we probably won't disagree with you, like in the sense of, there are paths to that happening, of course. um I know so much for me about playing this game still right now is the macro and trying to figure out um the big edges to be had before getting really granular with the player takes. And I definitely spend a lot of time trying to construct my rankings in a way where you'll have this outfield base early, which you can then supplement with some high scoring infielders who are mispriced, which you can then supplement with this big range of pitchers, but you don't just want one of them, you want like three or four of them. So they're all mushed together and it's just like that's sort of how I set up um my rankings. And again, creating the super team for football fans out there. We saw this puzzle being or happening in real time this past season where the wide receivers just started going so early. And for a lot of wide receiver heavy drafters, that was uncomfortable early in the offseason. But what I think the best drafters did by the end of this past summer drafting for football was understanding that this allows us to get one or two anchor wide receivers. And then if we can pinpoint the right running backs, we can still have top running backs, and you can kind of create the super team. And there might be some individual players that miss, but that structure has just really high ceiling. And that's how I've been going about baseball this offseason, where I think there's a construction to get the highest sorting team. And if you're drafting enough and diversifying enough along the way within that structure, that you're just increasing your chances of hitting on the right players. If that all kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense. And the example that you use, like player whatever 34 versus 37, if you like 37 more and you think he's better, and uh, it's not the position or perhaps the reason that we don't have them ahead of player 34 is because of the position scarcity element. Then take the player that you like on our rankings, and then figure out how that affects your build. And if you're looking at our rankings and you don't like the outfielders that we have at the top, scroll down, because maybe the signal there is that we're thinking you should maybe be grabbing an outfielder there.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you wanted to cover about just how to use rankings and how we develop them before we get into the sheet a little?
The one thing I would really uh, emphasize, maybe not emphasize, but I would suggest, highly suggest, is that if you are brand new uh, to baseball, if you're brand new to starting, if you're just getting started drafting this year, and maybe you've done some in the past, and you want to use the rankings that we're putting out, I would still do at least one just without them. Like, I would not go straight to the rankings. Do one, I would say, depending on how many total you're going to do, uh, I would do 10% without rankings first of my total drafts, and get a feel for the rooms and practice that, understanding what other players are doing at certain points in the draft before you really start zoning in maybe on players and rankings.
For sure. Yeah, that's really well said. I think that about covers my end of it too, about kind of this process. And these are little, like, I'm sure throughout future episodes we'll be chiming in with little points like, hey, this is something about the rankings um that we're thinking right now. And also just want to put out, speaking for all of us, that we're really receptive to feedback on this sort of stuff, not just hey, why don't you have Ellie higher, um but also like, hey, I noticed you said this about how you're developing your rankings, but do you consider this as well? And Rankings are similar to projections. You can only pick one number. You can only have, someone's got to be pick 8, and you can only have one person at that spot. So there's realistically a greater spread within that number, and I think, especially compared to just underdog ADP right now, that these rankings will give you an edge. So with
Yeah,
that being said, let's dive in a little to the sheet, I
I
think.
I do have one more thing. It's important to when you're using the rankings, we've talked about this a few times on other shows, uh, to be aware of the blind spots of the rankings. So the Paul Goldschmidt problem, as we like to well, I'm just coining that, but we referred to it as 2 years ago. Paul Goldschmidt's like insane season that we mostly missed out on because of uh, the position scarcity thing, and we weren't looking for infielders at that spot. So the way that these rankings are set up, there are blind spots of players that have really high upside, um, that could go off at a good price and like get multiple rounds of value that you might miss out on if you follow them straight up. And that's why sometimes, or that's also why doing those before rankings drafts kind of gives you an idea of where those players actually sit and where they come off the board. So be aware of that and make sure you understand what players you might be also missing out on, that um, you you're okay with that, like I am, just based on how I'm overall drafting, or you have a way in your process to overcome that and get some of that player.
For sure.
All right, so let's let's jump in. I think we got all the stuff covered. All right, so here is the sheet. Again, the link will be in the YouTube description. Otherwise, if you're viewing this on the Substack, the link will be there. This is the beautiful sheet that the sheet master Chris has put together. So there is a few tabs that we're going to highlight. The first and I think most fun one is the composite. So we'll come back to this one, but basically, if you dig down into these couple other tabs, you'll get to our individual rankings. So maybe you think this sheep guy is a moron and I don't want to listen to him. So I'm going to look at Chris's and Brendan's. So you can do that individually. There is some interesting stuff here. If you get into here, you can see some of their projections based on Steamer right now. I'm sure we'll get added columns as Chris is able to, and other projection systems come out. And then the position, ADP trends, and then some sort of tier rankings that I requested and then didn't use. But yeah, you can look at the individual teams here, rankings, if you want to ignore a certain person on the crew. No hard feelings. Okay, maybe some, but so that's there. And this sheet is pulling in live ADP through some HTML magic. So it should keep updating. And like I said, we'll be updating our ranks as we see necessary. So this main sheet got your underdog name. There is some hidden columns here that if you want to download these and upload to Underdog, and maybe we do a little tutorial video separate from this on how to do that. That might be something that people like, if you're new to Underdog and haven't uploaded rankings before. But if you download this sheet, you will get the information that you need to upload to Underdog. I guess we might have changed the heading column for that. I don't know. We'll talk about that, but that will be available. So then you have the positions, teams, live ADP, And then this column, this main column here, this SD underscore rank is our averaged ranking between the three of us. And then it shows you our individual rankings. And that's followed by a little column that shows you the difference between our ranking and the live ADP. And then there is this fun column, the spread, if you want to see how much we disagree on a guy. So that shows you the difference between the highest rank and the lowest rank between the three of us. So that kind of also, if you're looking at that, you can get an idea of maybe adjusting your thoughts based on how volatile even between the three of us are.
That's a really great rundown, I think, of how to use it all. I'm, um, as I alluded to at the beginning of the show, I think one of the most fun things that we're going to have, or one of the most fun topic or conversations that we're going to have all through draft season, especially when the dinger comes out and, we really start honing in on these ranks, is kind of the specific places that we have some of these guys. I know I took a quick peek to see who I'm highest on, to see who I'm lowest on. And, I think we want to hit a few of those tonight, of just some early thoughts, get the brains working a little bit.
Yeah. So the first thing that stood out to me once we had Chris got his in today, and we had all three of ours, and he did some cleanup work on this. The first thing that I noticed was that we all pretty much agree with the first 10 outfielders. We didn't. No one really stuck an infielder in there.
Yeah, and again, we've been kind of being, it's tough because there might still be some new people joining and everything, but the idea is really just outfield is so scarce. So many of the best players are outfielders anyway. Even if you play in roto or something where the position scarcity might not be as big of a thing. So when you combine like the highest scoring players play the most scarce position, it's just really a no brainer. There's unless you're doing 150 drafts and you want to work in Freddie Freeman at pick 4 to get some interesting build or something, like other than something like that, which you might not even want to do anyway. um there's just no reason to fade those first 10 outfielders. And I then took that even one step further with a lot of this outfield thought that I've been working on, and I've just had enough of it at this point, and I put Kyle Schwarber 11th and I put Mike Trout 12th. So I am saying, if you have first pick, you better be getting an outfielder.
Yeah, that is interesting. I have not got to there in the drafts that I've been doing. I have been getting them in the second round as I see fit, but yeah, I still have this.
And I think that this isn't an accuracy competition in the way some other rankings providers might just want to get as close to what the end finish is going to be points wise or whatever it might be as possible. I'm doing this in a way of you got to have an understanding of ADP, like we've talked about, and everything too. So Mike Trout, let me see his exact live ADP at the moment.
It's here. It's
um
here in the sheet. 21.3 right now.
All right, 21.3. I know I was blind. I couldn't see on the StreamYard. I don't have my glasses on. So
Oh,
anyway, so Mike Trout has, so I had to pull it up on my sheet. So Mike Trout's live ADP is 21.3. If you have the 12th pick, well, I guess that that's back to back anyway. I think my point with it is saying, that doesn't mean you have to take him ahead of Freddie Freeman necessarily. But what I'm kind of signaling with that is to say, hey, even if you don't take this guy, with your first pick, if he's available basically anywhere with your second pick, just take him. And that's kind of what I'm trying to signal with that. Going back to, what we talked about leading into this, just all the reasons to use rankings and how to use them and all that sort of stuff.
yeah. So then going down a little bit, the other thing we do have Strider and Cole as our top two pitchers, but based on our rankings, you're probably not getting them if they fall, unless they fall. And even I haven't even like I don't even know if I would take them at where I have them ranked, but it's a similar thing to the outfield is having them there at a certain point where if they are still there, you have to think like if they're a couple spots down on the rankings and you're picking in the second round at the end of the second round and they're still there for some strange reason, I want you to realize that and think about that. You're getting a good value, sort of thing.
I think something else that might help people using this is the kind of that column second from the right, the rank ADP difference all the way over on the right side is really look at that and think through what that means in terms of Strider. We have 5 picks off, and in the early rounds, that is a quote unquote decent amount. But then if you look at the composite, that's a big reason is because I have him all the way down at 23. Whereas I had him even, where Matt has him at 18, it's going to be a lot closer sort of thing. But 5 picks off, Spencer Strider, he at that point maybe isn't someone you want to necessarily be fading. But the more you scroll down that column and you see there are some players who are, 20, 30 spots off that where consensus like, hey, this is, someone should not consider at this point.
Someone
That
you talked about earlier.
yeah, Edelise, yeah. I think Ellie was another. But that's someone where you might want to take, a stronger fade stance. Um, again than just Strider because 5 picks is not that much. Where I'll be like I'm not comfortable going in with like 0 Strider or anything, but I might be comfortable going in with 0 Ellie if his price holds. So those are just again another way to like kind of use this sheet that might be helpful for people.
Yeah, and I guess that would be a good suggestion just to. I know maybe if you're brand new to Underdog or you're brand new, it's just starting for the year. It's kind of tough to be looking at the draft and have another sheet open. But I find that one now that I have my ranks developed, I'm going to take them off personally as I draft, and I'm going to have them open on a separate side, or I kind of have them in my head already just from doing them. So that's where practicing is helpful, and getting those first set of drafts so you know the flow of rooms and the flow of drafts. So you can then, you don't have to upload the rankings directly to Underdog. You can multitask a little bit better because you know where decision points come and stuff in a draft, and you're not super focused on those decision points, and you can take a little more mental process to analyzing the ranks versus the draft.
That's a reason, and I know I'm a little bit of a sickle for this, but I'm a huge fan of slow drafts. And I always give the caveat that you can't just join one slow draft and expect it to be a great time because it's going to drive you mad. But you got to join like, 5 to 10 at once because that way every couple hours you're coming up with a pick in a certain draft. But because it is a slow draft, you can take that time. So I can look and say, oh, I'm on the clock. I'm busy right now. I'm going to take 20 minutes and then I'm going to go on my computer, pull up the ranks, see who's still available, and kind of compare that way, and you can more so take your time with that. But again, I know slow drafts aren't for everyone.
Yeah, and let's see. So somebody else that stands out to me that I think is pretty fun. This is more just a player take. We're all pretty much in a similar range on Pablo Lopez, and he is not someone I expected to like as much as I did this year. And so we are ahead of ADP by a half a round. So we'll be getting him a little more often based on our ranks. But yeah, that's where you can compare the ADP and our spread and see our rank versus ADP and make decisions based on that.
So much of what happens with at this point in the life cycle of Underdog Best Ball as a game, what happens is I'm so focused on the macro that I'm trying to think like, okay, this range of quote unquote SP1s, who's the worst one that I can get the best price on, and that kind of becomes your poster boy for that macro topic. Like for me last year, Luis Castillo was someone who was being drafted as an SP2, but I thought was an SP1, and he just became the poster boy for, hey, you don't need to take Strider because you can take, this ace at this better price. And I wonder if that's part of what happened with all of us with Pablo there.
Yeah, I think that kind of leads into, just to hop over to my rankings. I do have uh, this pitcher tier where I have them all in a row. They all have kind of drastically different ADPs, with Corbin Burns being 26. So it this is where, as you're drafting and you're looking ahead into the ranks a little bit further, kind of you can kind of group similar players, and know, like, again, this is where you're making mental notes of who you already have taken in drafts, uh, assuming you're going to do some volume. And Corbin Burns, we kind of have ranked similar to Gaussman and Castillo. No, Gaussman. Well, yeah, Burns and Gaussman are the example here, where we kind of think of them similar to Castillo and Wheeler. And if you're drafting based on ranks, you're going to get a lot more Castillo and Wheeler. But you have to be aware of that, and sometimes click on Burns when he's not the top of the ranks, if you want him, and not totally want to fade him.
Exactly. And that's where it becomes about, kind of that puzzle of what's you gotta think through, not just what's this sounds like counterintuitive, but it's not just what's like the best pick I can make here, but what's the best pick I can make that's gonna give me, the best team overall. And a lot of that is leaning into position scarcity and trying to get those guys who are mispriced and guys who might be similar but have really differing ADPs, and it just kind of makes your choice for you in that sense. So I've been, again, like last year, we talked so much about round one outfield and really banging that home, and then kind of, okay, now we're off. Like this year for me, it's a lot more about getting that outfield base early. Christian Yelich, as we head into round three, is someone I really like. There's George Springer, Brandon Nimmo are guys who I'm just, really, you know, trying to build an outfield base on, and through 5 rounds have three outfielders that I feel really good about. It frees you up um in other areas of the draft so much, where you don't have to be reaching multiple times, and you can just get these, mispriced infielders and pitchers in the middle round. So I'm willing to give up a little bit of projected points, even within the first 5 rounds to get those outfielders I feel good about. That's something that, and then therefore it comes back around where, you know, because so many of my drafts, I'm a little weak at infield by the middle rounds. So that's why I look at Yandy. I'm like, okay, I need to make sure I get Yandy, because he's someone who's similar to your tier of pitchers that you were just talking about. You feel you can get on the back end, who's close enough to the front end guys, but it's such a better price. That's what really drives a lot of my ranks.
Yeah. So this this happens to be right now our biggest discrepancy on infielder. You do have him at 46, and Chris and I are quite a ways behind you. But again, this isn't. We have 80 and 86, so he comes out to be 71, which is still like 2 rounds ahead of ADP. So you're still going to wind up with him a lot. Uh, and this is where, for you, he's going to be someone that's sticking out early, and you want to focus on. Um,
Yeah, and it's,
and
again, so much of it is really just, high, and that's why the composite ranks are really good in in a lot of ways, because it you won't end up with Yandy like crazy early. But again, it's just like it's such a highlight for me of, hey, like, if this guy ever rose to this point, he would still at least be in consideration, but pay attention to the live ADP, and if you are making these certain builds, he's kind of a key to it all.
yeah, yeah. Whereas he's kind of the opposite of Ellie De La Cruz, whom I am the lowest on. I have him ranked down in with Royce Lewis and O'Neill Cruz. But overall, you having him at 68 and Chris having him at 54 and me at 79 is someone you're never going to get in a draft.
It's almost, I put him down at 68, where it's almost even it wouldn't have mattered if I put him 60 because his ADP is 32. Wouldn't have mattered if I put him 50. Like at that point, it's such a clear fade. And it really just comes down to like, okay, let's see, ADP wasn't a construct. Like, where would I actually start considering him? When you factor in if he hits his best case scenario, all that sort of stuff. But the fact that we're as a group, 34, picks off is that's where you can start asking yourself, like, and this is, I don't know, I might try to write an article on this. It's just a question of like, are you okay having zero Ellie? And I know you've mentioned, multiple times on this episode, even that, you're comfortable taking some of those like quote unquote riskier stances. And I think Chris might lean even more, wanting to diversify and all that sort of stuff. But it's like at some point, there's a question of is someone just always a bad pick, no matter what, even if they hit all their upside scenarios. I think Pat Kerrane for football this offseason was talking about Kadarius Toney at one point when he was going so early. It was like he was like, I don't care, even if he hits, whatever percentile outcome, like it's still a bad pick. And that's a real question with Ellie at this price. It's really hard. And I think we're kind of making a statement that it's just not a consideration um, with where he's going right now.
Yeah, yeah, and I like I could have left him out of my top 100 because of the fact that I would never get him. But to me, the when I was wanting to place him in the list, it was who I liked in similar upside cases, and in this case, it was O'Neal Cruz and Royce Lewis. So that's how I ended up with giving him a 79, even though I'm never going to get him in the top 100.
I think the last thing I want to say about him is something that I've been really championing the past couple off seasons that you mentioned is to me, like I think on NFBC, for instance, he's in like the late 20s. I could be wrong in that, but it's still early. It's technically even a little earlier. But to me, like if Ellie hits, it's going to be such a bigger hit in Roto than it can be on Underdog because of just what the stolen bases would do for you in a category format. Because he plays, the deepest position on Underdog. Um, so if you really are, that big of an Ellie fan, my advice based on what we're looking at this price is to just take him in Roto. Um, join a startup dynasty league and take him there. Those are the ways to play it more so than loading up your bags in Underdog.
Yeah, or just take him on Underdog and enjoy. That's we should have put that caveat really at the front of all this discussion. If you want to use the ranks, you should also just have fun. Make sure you're having fun too.
Yeah,
If there's something you don't like about the ranks, there's no reason to get like say the whole thing's wrong. Just have fun, make your adjustments. Uh, we're going to be wrong most of the time. to be perfectly honest, we're going to be so wrong about this list, and we're going to have a fun time looking back at it, even in a month, maybe.
for sure. Like we said, there's a lot to change that's going to come. New player takes, new macro thoughts, and honestly, just more baseball news, which hopefully starts to come a lot sooner.
Yeah. So something fun that I kind of wanted to look at the end here was start to look at some of the players that aren't going to show up really quite the same right now based on top 100 because one of us doesn't even have them in the top 100. So I think Chris isn't here to defend himself, but the first player we get to based on actually let's sort this by live ADP here. Yeah, that's what we want to do. Yeah, so this is the name I was looking for. Yeah, so I'm sorting based on live ADP. And with a full on fade from all three of us in the top 100 is Lane Thomas. He's the top guy.
That's so funny to me. I was scrolling down a bit and seeing the gray boxes obviously indicates that we didn't rank that person in the top 100. That's one of the downsides of limiting ourselves to a top 100. Again, we talk through the reason why we did it earlier, um but yeah, that's a great I don't know. It would have been a good like trivia question going in to ask like who's the first player in ADP who none of us ranked.
Yeah, and very similar, Cedric Mullins. Chris did get him in there, but you and I do not have him. Um, we got a Shane Beeper, who both you and I are out of our top 100. Christopher has him right on the edge. Uh, I think it is interesting that some of these are outfielders, considering we're talking about outfielder scarcity. So some of us are having strong opinions about some of them towards the back part of the top 100, that they might belong in the top 120 or 140, more like. So
Yeah,
here,
Stephen Kwan is really interesting is someone who's, not someone I've been really high on in any years entering. But one there's all these things that we're thinking about, individual player takes, macro thoughts. Something that I think's gotten lost in the shuffle that I even think I really fell victim to last year is just realizing or remembering or understanding how underdog points are scored. And it's points based, it's cumulative, it's volume, it's playing time. Stephen Kwan hits first for the Guardians basically every single day. Um, his skill set is pretty good for underdog scoring, and he it's just kind of a boring pick, but it's a scarce position, and he kind of just volumes his way into being the steady Eddie um, for your team. The way those points come together.
yeah, and here's a case where I have Ozuna at 72 and Kwan at 75. Um, and this is a case where I'm doing more of a comparison of who I have at the outfield position. And if I want a floor guy, I will scroll down, or I guess not scroll, yeah, scroll down in my ranks to add a Stephen Kwan. Um, so that's again where practicing and knowing where these guys go normally, and making those decisions as you draft, also on who you already have drafted.
Mm-hmm.
Some other fun names here. We're getting towards to the end of the top 100 ADP, but we don't have CJ Abrams or Nathaniel Lowe ranked at all. I feel like they're just victims of the position, and I think I don't love CJ Abrams, uh, just because I don't know. It felt weird. Maybe he changed something. Maybe the power just sort of came out of nowhere, and so I'm maybe that's a take lock or whatever. But I'm personally not always going to love guys that have just like one season out of nowhere. And maybe I'm wrong there. And again, you're the better player analyst than me, and this is more of a gut feel on him. Um,
I think Abrams, you really got to look at it from like an aging curve perspective, and try to remember that this guy was a really top end, a high prospect, and didn't happen for him right away, and that leads so many of us to just like kind of writing him off, forgetting about him. That being said, like obviously I didn't rank him either, so I'm not necessarily a huge believer. Again, he's a stolen base guy that's just going to play better than Roto. I think to be a middle round in or to be an infielder just going in kind of the middle-ish rounds on underdog, you really do need to separate yourself. Like I've obviously made the statement that Yandy does separate in a way where some of these other guys for my viewpoint just they're not able to. And Abrams, while he's so fun in Roto because he could be up and coming, he could keep getting better, he could steal you a ton of bases, and those are tough to get. It's just he doesn't have as many paths to to being a difference maker for you on underdog especially.
Yeah, I think a good comparison here at similar ADP is Dansby Swanson, who is not does not have well, probably 2 years ago was his peak, right? The 2 years ago with the Braves, where he was leading up,
Hmm.
is hitting early in that order. If you're looking at his scoring potential this year, uh, it doesn't have a ceiling similar to what could possibly come from CJ Abrams. And again, um, that's where you need to consider who you already have on your team, and how you want to just attack infield position overall. Um, so I don't know. That's what I
Yeah.
got.
No, like you said, he falls victim to where it's not just that even necessarily about him. Sometimes it's just, you can keep scrolling down, look at the live ADP, and there's infielders that I'm comfortable with. I always know I have William Contreras in my back pocket. If I need an upside pick, I got Junior Caminero in my back pocket late. It just, that's kind of just the way it works out.
Yeah, we need to talk about this Riley Green not rank here.
Let me pull something up real quick.
Oh, you came prepared. Yeah, I know. Chris is even higher on him. Uh, Actually, these three guys, Riley Green, James Outman, and Eloy, are ending up, well, like one of the three is in pretty much, I don't know, 75% of my builds, and that might be a positionality thing too, when it comes down to it.
I think Riley Green for me, it's a little bit of a soft fade for he had elbow surgery, and not that that's going to cause him to necessarily miss like a crazy amount of time. I think he's due back around opening day, but even that aside, like I just got like we've had two instances now of players who had elbow surgery, hitters even not pitchers, who came back but clearly just weren't themselves. It took a few months. Max Muncy, it happened to him a couple years ago, and Bryce Harper, it happened to him, and they both did get back. So long term, I'm not necessarily like like gun shy on Riley Green or anything like that, but that's in my head where more and more, I mean, honestly, like I've considered that with Otani, and I don't even want to like say that out loud and make it seem like I would be willing to fade Otani or anything like
Well,
that, but
you can see where I have him
yeah,
ranked.
but just that idea of this guy's coming off elbow surgery and just seeing what happened to Muncy and Harper for the first few months of their return, like that's definitely in the back of my head a little bit. Um, and I just hate Comerica Park for hitters, but
Fair enough.
so those are kind of things to
Yeah,
consider with all these ranks.
yeah. I am. I do kind of well. I started early on Otani and I was excited about him, and then I really started thinking about it. And in the process of doing these ranks, I kept bumping him. I had him like fourth when I started doing this ranks, and I kept bumping him down because I don't know. I might just end up with a soft fade from here on out, just
For
because of the risk.
Yeah, and that's why we need to have a show on those top 10 outfielders and trying to figure out what the right order is, because it's something that's like not that important, like whatever, just take your favorite one at the time, um but it's something that I think could end up really mattering, and I don't think it's pure randomness or variance, something like that.
All right.
But
Any other player you want to take a quick look at before we get out of here?
I think I hit my biggest ones. Let me check.
Should we check your guy that you've got? You've become synonymous with the Tristan Cassis.
Yeah.
So you,
I guess, yeah, something I would say about him, just so I'll just end with this, I guess, comparing that situation to like CJ Abrams, where Casas is this mid-round infielder who, if you just look at projections, like, he's going to come out, probably about where he's going. And you do need to kind of take that leap of faith and say, hey, I think he was a young player who was different, from May on than he was in April, especially, but, and then, particularly in the second half, this guy really caught lightning in a bottle. It's an incredible home park. Um, you know, I'm not sold that the lineup's one of the best in baseball, but the home park is really good. The skills are so good. He's someone who could make a leap that we're drafting several rounds earlier next year. So when you're looking for someone at a deep position like infield on underdog, those are kind of the questions I want to be asking myself. And then you want to pair those players with some sturdier options. So if I've been taking a few vanilla infielders, I'm just off the top of my head, maybe guys like Marcus Semien or Alex Bregman, guys who are just very projectable, kind of going to be getting points every week. Then I can add a Tristan Casas on top of that. Like that's an interesting infield construction to me.
Yes, excellent point. All right, let's get this out of here. I guess that's our topics for the night. We are going to be, well, obviously, if you've got to this, you've probably looked at the rankings along with us. We're going to be releasing these together. Like I said, we will be working on getting the full ones by the time the Dinger contest is out. And I don't know what else we got on tap that am I not thinking about.
Yeah, I think just baseball's kind of going to be really picking up here a bit now that football has ended. If you're enjoying the ranks, let us know. If you have questions about it, let us all know. And if you're angry about anything in particular, then direct that towards Matt and Chris.
That's fine. You can send me all the angry things you want. I will eat that up. That's
No, I'm
fine.
just kidding. We do, appreciate feedback, especially if it's, in a constructive manner.
Yeah.
So it's a lot putting, your ranks out there and letting people pick them apart and say like, hey, why does he have this guy so low? But I think I always try to approach these things by giving reason. And I'm definitely not afraid to say, hey, yeah, this is wrong by me. Let me flip something here. So yeah, no, hope that it honestly creates more conversation and questions than it answers. I think that would be, a goal of ours to come from this.
Yeah. Excellent way to put it. Next week, I think we should have another episode of this show out. We're kind of maybe going to try and get a guest on next week. We'll see if that lines up with other schedules, but we'll be back, and hopefully we'll get Chris back out of the world of work and moving and all that he's been busy with. So for Brendan and myself and Chris, thanks for watching, and enjoy those rankings.